And following his remarks, we will hear some brief comments from Mrs. Carolyn Hanshin, who is the Vice President of the Women's Federation for World Peace International. So we'll turn the time over to them for some opening remarks. Mr. Marion.
Excellencies, respected panelists, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Universal Peace Federation, it's an honor to welcome you to this conference here at the United Nations. The theme, "No More Wars, Can We?" sounds like a cry from the heart in a period when we are surrounded with conflict and human tragedy. This conference will examine two aspects of peace building of vital importance in this challenging time: the role of religious leaders and the role of women. Geneva is a memorable place in the history of war and peace. Many came to this city with the hope to put an end to war, and the spectacular Palais des Nations reminds us of our determination in the preamble of the UN to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. However, wars have continued, and ethnic and religious conflicts have multiplied, spreading tragedies that will indeed burden succeeding generations. Yet there is one lesson that we could learn from these conflicts, contrary to many scholarly predictions. History is not moving toward the end of religion. Instead, it proves that people's religious convictions are deeply rooted and in most cases more enduring than their political affiliation. This is why in the year 2000, envisioning the kinds of conflict that could multiply in the new century, our UPF founders made a proposal at a United Nations conference in New York. To fulfill its mission, they suggested, the UN would need a bicameral structure which would include an interreligious council composed of national representatives from the fields of religion, education, or culture, who could complement and support political leaders in their decision-making process for conflict prevention and resolution. Indeed, the reality of wars in the 21st century, culminating today in the conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza and in other areas around the world, often reveals their religious underpinnings. In the words of the UNESCO preamble, putting an end to war requires us to construct the defenses of peace in the minds of men. Isn't that the very role of religion? From Gandhi to Martin Luther King, great peacemakers have shown that conflicts can be resolved by drawing spiritual power from a faith that is rooted in the heart and guided by ethics. That is the kind of religious dialogue that today's world is calling for. On the other hand, anyone who has experienced family life knows that there can be no peace without a woman in the family. Moreover, although they are still underrepresented in peace processes, it's well established today that women's participation contributes to more lasting and effective peace agreements. Therefore, this timely conference combines two essential topics for our time, and each panel features distinguished leaders with great experience. Respected panelists, thank you. We are looking forward to your contributions. We are grateful to be allowed to host this important meeting in the setting of the United Nations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacques. Actually, maybe I wouldn't have had to write a speech because you said so much about women. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Women's Federation for World Peace International, I just want to say a few words actually about the way this idea, this no peace without women, which is the other side of no more war, can we, came about. No more war was the slogan of the women's peace movement after World War I. Its overall goal is still not yet accomplished. But women were united, courageous, strategic, and many important steps were taken, including women's greater access to higher education and public leadership. Eleanor Roosevelt famously said, No one won the last war, and no one will win the next. Building upon the same logic and passion, the No Peace Without Women, launched just after the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, where Women's Federation for World Peace International and the International Association of First Ladies for Peace, which is an association of actually the Universal Peace Federation, called an emergency meeting at the United Nations. In that small meeting, we had the head of the UNECE, former Finnish Prime Minister, Albanian former Deputy Prime Minister. We had a representative of the EU Parliament. First Lady from Cyprus was represented, and we had a group of civil society representatives, including Women's Federation. At that meeting, we came up with the idea, no peace without women, which means, has many depths and layers, but importantly, it starts with our own commitment. No peace without us. And as well, of course, our demand to be accepted as full partners. Months later, we held our first conference with over 1,400 participants and views, with speakers again of the same caliber. We had the former director of the UNESCO Culture of Peace program and the same former heads of state, heads of UN agencies, mostly women, and of course, civil society. I mention this not to self-promote, but just to show the evidence of what kind of partnership is possible for such a theme, actually, where civil society and governments and, heads of international organizations can sit down and really discuss. So we were all caught by the spirit of the theme, and of course, timing is so important. The next event also met with enthusiasm and practical outcomes in a very tense region was No Peace Without Women in the Balkans. But how to sustain the enthusiasm? We were reminded of the brilliantly envisioned UNESCO Culture of Peace program, which branched off into different fields and initiatives at the end of its decade, unfortunately losing momentum, but leaving a wealth of ideas and literature and practitioners to be revived. Critical to our success is promoting that each of us is needed for this transformation. This is not just something by the leaders. Peace leadership must be bottom-up, top-down, and ultimately spherical, circular. Discovering, and one important element is my own discovering myself, being transformed in the process, my becoming a more peaceful person as I contribute, or it will not be sustainable. So the goal of this meeting is not just talk, but to really build the alliance. Let's take the window of opportunity. Can we? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marion and Mrs. Hanshin, for your comments, and we are grateful for your organizations for sponsoring and bringing us together for this discussion today. This is part one of a two-part discussion, as you have heard, and this first session we'll be taking a look at a faith-based approach to creating lasting peace and eliminating war through reconciliation. In a world marked by division and conflict, often unfairly attributed to religious beliefs as sometimes the cause of this struggle, the role of faith in fostering harmony and understanding is more crucial than ever. So over the next hour, we hope to explore efforts, ideas, and actionable steps that can pave the way towards a more peaceful and compassionate world and move us closer to the goal of lasting peace. So we have with us today a very distinguished group of panel representing different faith traditions and perspectives, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of them. And they're all very accomplished, but I've tried to make just a brief introduction before each of them. I could go on and on about their many accomplishments. But to begin today's discussion, we are very pleased to have with us Reverend Dr. Jerry Pillay, who is the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches here in Geneva. Reverend Pillay is a Reformed pastor, member of the Uniting Presbyterian Church in Southern Africa, a professor of theology at the University of Pretoria, where he heads the Department of History and Ecclesiology, and is the Dean of the Faculty of Theology and Religion. He was elected president of the World Communion of Reformed Churches in 2010 and assumed his role as General Secretary of the World Council of Churches in January of 2023. Welcome, Reverend Pillay. The time is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. All protocols observed. I would like to say a special thank you to Mr. Hanshen for the invitation to speak to you today on this very pertinent topic, and also like to thank the panelists and the chair for leading us and contributing to the discussion today. I think it's a very important topic when we speak about no more wars, can we? Now, this past week, I was jolly pleased to be walking, or to be driving rather, on the streets in London. And when I first arrived there, I noticed a very big billboard that said, "Peace, please?" And I inquired what it was all about, whether it was a reflection of calling for peace in the world. And I was told, no, we're trying to say to the people in London, you need to be patient with one another. Somehow I wished it was Britain's statement about the state of affairs in the world. Peace in the world is so much needed today in the face of wars, conflicts, and violence. Political leaders and social leaders and even religious leaders are not saying peace, peace, when the world is crying out for peace. When thousands of people are killed, properties and land are senselessly destroyed, and the environment is at risk, we seem to think that the solution to deal with our problems is through violence. We seem to harbor and sustain a culture of violence. We seem to be losing or have already lost the desire for dialogues to find peaceful solutions to our numerous challenges. Currently, the world is living amidst terrible and unnecessary wars, as we are aware of. We all know about Ukraine and Russia, and in recent times, since last year, the Israeli and Palestinian war since October 7th. Even though this context has been with us much, much longer, since 1967 already. There are many more wars and conflicts going on that usually don't get much coverage. The ones that matters are the ones the Western powers are most interested in. Others are insignificant, yet so costly to human lives and peace in communities. There are presently more than 45 armed conflicts taking place throughout the Middle East and North Africa, and some statistics say more than 65 armed conflicts throughout the world. Many African countries continue to experience conflicts and tensions. For example, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Cameroon, Egypt, just to name a few. What are the main factors for conflict? Researchers tell us that there are at least 5 main types of conflict. Information conflicts, when not enough information is given to people. Values conflicts, when our values are not in agreement. Interest conflicts, when our interest has not been secured. Relationship conflicts, and structural conflicts, which are systemic. The major root causes include political, economic, and social inequalities, extreme poverty, economic stagnation, poor government services, high unemployment, environmental degradation, cultural dimension related to ethnicity or religion. Religious conflicts are prevalent in many parts of the world, and while this may be the case, a closer examination will reveal that these are mainly grounded in socio-economic and political tensions. I visited Nigeria late last year, where the religious leaders and people confirmed such a situation in terms of religious conflict. In Africa, conflicts are caused by a number of factors, such as arbitrary borders created by the colonial powers, economic debt, vested interest in colonial powers. Even after independence, they continue to propagate tensions and divisions in the countries they once occupied. Other factors are ethnic issues, unstable political leadership, corruption, poverty, inaccessibility to quality health care, lack of good education, and declining economies. Conflicts are internal and international, meaning within states and between countries. In Africa, conflicts are mainly internal within states. The conflict picture I have painted for you is only partial and much, much worse. The world is facing multiple shocks, geopolitical, related to energy, economics, and a climate emergency. Yet the political establishments are marked by an inability or unwillingness to address these multidimensional and complex challenges. Yet in such a global context, we ask whether no wars are possible, and can we work towards peace and peaceable solutions to the complex problems? My answer to this question is that we must be hopeful, and we must never give up the intentions of promoting and championing the necessity of peace. As people of faith, and that's the perspective I bring into this conversation, we have no option. We believe that God calls us to be peacemakers, peace builders, and peacekeepers. The God of justice and peace calls us to work for peace in the world and to create a world that is safe and stable for all people and planet. At its 11th assembly held in Karlsruhe in Germany in September 2022, the World Council of Churches reflected on the current perilous state of the world and adopted, among other many important policy statements, a statement on the things that make for peace, moving the world to reconciliation and unity. The Assembly observed in this document a statement that ours is a time of renewed and escalating global polarization, reconfiguration of governance and geopolitical alignments, divisions, confrontation, and military attacks, with all the appealing risks that attend to this context. It also acknowledged grave concerns about the instrumentalization of religious language, authority, and leadership to justify, support, or bless armed aggression or any kind of violence and oppression, in sharp contrast to the Christian calling to be peacemakers. These threats to peace, the Assembly declared, fundamentally violate the core tenets of the Christian faith and stressed that the calling to dialogue, encounter, and the pursuit of mutual understanding is the very essence of ecumenism and central to peacemaking. In its response to these realities, the Assembly expressed its rejection of the polarization and division of the human community and declared the Church's commitment to grapple with the threats and challenges to peace, justice, human security, and environmental sustainability through dialogue, encounter, and the pursuit of mutual understanding and cooperation, rather than through exclusion and confrontation. Also, the Assembly was careful to describe the things that make for peace much more comprehensively than the simple cessation of violence. Indeed, it called for greatly increased investment by governments and other actors in the foundations of true human security and global stability, including for urgent action to achieve climate justice and to avert the threat of a climate emergency, and for a just transition to renewable energy, for the elimination of extreme poverty, for sustainable development, and for measures to control rampant inequality, all of which, if not addressed, will fuel conflict. If we are to work towards no war and help create an alternative society established in peace, what then is needed? We also need to be mindful, as I've said, that peace is not the absence of war or conflict. It is more than that. It is about wholeness, reconciliation, and healing. As I reflect on this question to suggest that peace is possible, I would like to say that at the World Council of Churches, we talk about a pilgrimage of justice, reconciliation, and unity. We recognize that we are all pilgrims and co-pilgrims in the world, in God's world. Yes, God's world. And we often forget this. We like to think that we own this world. It is ours to do with it as we please, to secure, to live in it as if only we or our own groups and people matter. This world matters to God, and it should matter to us. To be good stewards, preserving the planet, supporting life-giving and life-affirming initiatives, not just for ourselves, but for all people and creation. So if no wars are possible, which I believe it is, then what must we do? Here I would like to offer some practical answers. They describe what we do as faith communities and what we do as the World Council of Churches. But I think most of these points are applicable to a broad audience. So if peace is to prevail, what should we be doing? A few points very quickly. Firstly, we need to challenge the powers and structures that incite war and violence and systemic power and evil. This is what we as faith communities refer to as prophetic witness, speaking and daring to speak truth to power. In religious terms, it is called repentance, a complete change of heart and mind and behavior. In ecumenism, we talk about the ecumenism of the heart, meaning it must touch us in order for us to be able to have significant relationships and a change in the way we think and in the way we believe. But we need to be prophetic. We have been prophetic as the World Council of Churches in our visits to numerous countries, to Israel and Palestine. We've had opportunity to meet with presidents in Israel and in Palestine and demand, really, a ceasefire. We've had opportunity to be in Sudan and speak to the president and vice president and force them into seeking dialogue and not using military forces to really find solutions. We also, as the World Council of Churches, have been invited to participate in the Total Peace Project in Colombia. And in June this year, I will be taking the executive of the World Council of Churches to Colombia. The president has invited the World Council of Churches to participate and facilitate in that process. So the prophetic witness is important and essential for all of us, especially as religious people. We cannot stand and watch when the world is being destroyed. When wars continue, we cannot be relaxed and sleeping at it. When people are dying in their numbers and the environment is being destroyed. Secondly, we need to work for justice. There is no peace without justice. So we speak about just peace. And just peace is what is needed in order to actually move forward, in order to stop wars and conflicts that are prevalent in the world today. We need economic justice, we need gender justice, we need climate justice, and we need digital justice. How do we bring all of these equations of justice into the conversation to push for peace in the world? Thirdly, we need to work towards healing and reconciliation. There are too much of brokenness, trauma, pain, and suffering in the world today. We cannot push things under the carpet. We have to address these issues if we want true reconciliation and healing. I believe that in discussing reconciliation, particularly as inspired by faith, we raise a vital, if often neglected, element in peacemaking, If we wish to be peacemakers, we must first be agents of reconciliation. And that's the crux of the topic today as well. Still, what is reconciliation, may we ask? In the fullest religious term, reconciliation is not just a state of non-hostility, nor even an agreement not to fight. Reconciliation makes peace. Reconciliation is a breakthrough to a new place, a healing of wounds and fractures, a transcendent value, and a religious practice that restores right relations between people or groups, with the earth and with God. Further, reconciliation is not merely a practice that religious communities espouse for others, such as warlords or gangs or nations at war. It is also one by which religious groups make peace with each other, diffuse intra-religious and inter-religious exclusions, misunderstanding, and prejudice, which historically have been at the root of so much of conflict. Interfaith peace building today includes interreligious dialogue and reconciliation. So achieving peace entails nurturing reconciliation in oneself, with one's community, and with others who are different from oneself, beyond the boundaries of just my people. But reconciliation has a wider scope. We also discern the evident need for reconciliation among races and in combating racism, healing the deep religious rifts opened by conflict, for example, in Ukraine, in class and ethnic tensions among dominant and oppressed religious groups in India or Myanmar, and even in conflicts created by the uneven ways in which we mitigate climate change or access to basic economic resources like water or clean air. In these and other examples, we can identify the typical barriers to reconciliation, which are self-interest or group interest, not acknowledging the humanity of others, exclusivism, whether they are national, religious, or political, deeply rooted historical prejudice against an ethnic group or religion or gender, and inflexible loyalty to tradition, or simple greed and hunger for power, any of which can be whipped up by mis or disinformation or the rhetoric of a demagogue. In this context, reconciliation requires a transvaluation of values, a changing of hearts and minds, a kind of conversion from self-interest to focus on the good of the other. Only then does it become the means by which misunderstanding is overcome, prejudice is dissolved, hostilities are diffused, and peace becomes possible. In a world on the brink, reconciliation is the indispensable salve and saving grace. Fourthly, we need to have an integrated approach to the complex challenges in addressing the Ukraine situation, Sudan, Israel, Palestine, and many other contexts. It is evident that we must address all issues, economic, political, spiritual, emotional, psychological. We are experiencing a deficit of morals and values that are necessary to restore, build, and stabilize societies and communities. That is why there are so much of conflicts and wars. We need to partner, fifthly, we need to partner and collaborate with others who have the same interest. The WCC partners with NGOs, people of other faiths, and even at times with people with no faith, to create a better world for all, and all means all. No more wars, can we? Is the topic. Even though our realities tell us that it is a far-fetched dream and somewhat impossible to realize in our time at the moment, yet we must not lose the vision and hope for the same. One powerful biblical picture is found in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 6 and 9, where it says, "The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, and the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea." What is described in this passage is the unthinkable and unimaginable picture of peace and harmony. The point is that it may seem impossible and impractical, but with God, all things are possible. This same God calls us and commissions us to be peacemakers, to have a world of harmony, peace, security, and stability. Peace is possible. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Let us keep saying peace, peace, in the middle of wars, and keep working for peace, especially when there is no peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Pillay, for sharing those very insightful and moving suggestions. I liked the 5 points that you made of challenging powers and structures, working towards justice, working for healing and reconciliation, an integrated approach to challenges, and a partnership and collaboration with others of similar interest. Those are excellent suggestions for us. I also appreciated your comments about the important role that reconciliation plays in changing hearts and minds. And you remind us that we have to be agents of reconciliation if we wish to be peacemakers. I actually had some questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to move on and save the questions because I suspect many of you might also have questions at the end. So we'll move on now and hear from Mr. Heiner Hanshin, who has been actively engaged in the work of peace for decades. And as we've heard, his organization is one of the architects of today's event. So Heiner, briefly to introduce him, Heiner W. Hanshin is the permanent representative of the Universal Peace Federation at the United Nations in Geneva, and the director of the Geneva Office for United Nations Relations. He is the coordinator of the Interreligious Association for Peace and Development in Europe and the Middle East. He is a co-founder of the Geneva Interfaith and Intercultural Alliance, and that is a multi-stakeholder platform to prevent enmity through dialogue, mutual understanding, and cooperation. Mr. Hanshin is also president of the Universal Peace Federation, Switzerland. And Mr. Hanshin, we now turn the time over to you for your remarks.
Thank you so much, Karen. Yeah. Can you hear me? I have a big voice because I have a big family, so I have to make sure all the children hear me. So if I'm too strong, please forgive me. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for joining this conference. No more wars, can we? And I think by now we should all think we can. Right? That's actually what we already say on the banner out there. So I would like to convey some of the thoughts that were at the origin of this conference as one of the architects of this meeting. On the outset of my presentation, I will read some quotes that I believe fit very well in the context of our current world. I'm sure you will know that one. All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. That was actually John F. Kennedy in May 17, 1961, addressing the Canadian Parliament. It's oftentimes understood it was Edmund Burke, but actually it was Kennedy who turned it this way. Then you have John Stuart Mill, bad men need nothing more to compass their end than that good men should look on and do nothing. This is the inaugural address at St. Andrews in 1867. First, the quotes I just read highlight the importance of decisive action in a time we are confronted with violence, injustice in the world. We cannot allow the negative to spread and pull all humanity into darkness. Brutal acts of violence and warfare in pursuit of self-interest and for solving differences can only be described as acts of evil. I think in this time we're living, to solve differences by means of wars and violence, it should be over. There is no justification for that, even though various ideologues or ideologies in history try to find ways to justify war and violent struggles. The current world has more than 100 violent conflicts in many trouble spots around the globe. The situation, though different in nature, resembles each other. At the same time, actors of religious faith very often say that they are committed to the good of humanity. They seem to teach that through religion we should become better people. I'm a religious person myself, so I'm challenging here myself. I'm not challenging others. So we seem to teach that through religion we should become better people. We could realize a world of peace. Indeed, through practicing loving kindness and goodness, we should expect to become better people. However, if a difference in doctrine and belief causes us to perpetrate acts of violence against others who disagree with our viewpoint, even religious actors can become perpetrators of evil. This is not so easy for people of faith to admit, despite its veracity. The quotes that I read in the beginning seem to be telling us unmistakably that in face of injustice and unrighteousness, especially as religious leaders and actors, we must act. Reverend Dr. William McComish, we all admire him here in Geneva, stated at UPF's World Summit in 2020 in Seoul, Korea, addressing a gathering of Christian clergy at the World Clergy Leadership Conference, I think we should be quite clear, I quote, I think we should be quite clear. If we are not leaders, we are not clergy. Clergy have a role of leading their communities. This means simply that people of faith should feel responsibility for the suffering and injustices experienced by the world's peoples. As people of faith, we should engage in a deep self-reflection about our role. And that's the purpose of this meeting here. It's also maybe, on the one hand, a self-reflection, but maybe also you will hear the next part after. Religious leaders of all backgrounds, clergy, imams, priests, and other leading spiritual mandate holders assume a leadership role in practicing a life for others according to their own teachings. But this role is not just limited towards their own congregation and constituencies. According to their religious mandate, they should be great examples to lead towards a world of goodness by means of genuine love, truthfulness, justice, and honesty. There are very high expectations for religious and spiritual leadership. Let's be clear. According to various case studies around the globe, religious actors have an immense potential impact in many situations due to their considerable influence and authority, especially towards their constituencies. Also, unlike political actors, religious actors show greater moral legitimacy and authority through their religious lifestyle of humility, simplicity, and devotion that many of the major world's religions seem to practice and emphasize. Among formal peace processes, however, there are not very many examples which show a successful inclusion of religious actors in a track one peace process. Now, I'm honest, Reverend Pillay, I was expecting you will talk maybe also about South Africa, because he's a South African and clergy, and I think South Africa is an example. As we know, there was apartheid, a dreadful system, and a terrible potential war and bloodshed was there. But because of this is an example of where faith leaders were included in the peace process. And this is a success story. That's why I have to say, you're humble. You didn't want to speak about that, but that was a great achievement.
I speak too much about South Africa.
Unfortunately, such examples are rare in the 20th and 21st centuries. There are not so many good success stories, but so the potential, including religious actors, into formal peace processes remains largely untapped. In our current world, where so many wars and conflict erupt almost daily, wouldn't it be meaningful for the nation states, governments, and the UN to strengthen the efforts for a more inclusive peace strategy that could mobilize the potential of the world's religions and religious actors? those religious leaders should be interreligious actors willing to serve humanity and the world at large. Why not to include religious actors into track 1, or at least track 1.5 peace processes? Means like track 1.5 is like state, governments, and civil society together. What if the wisdom and efforts of the world's religious leaders who represent the internal concerns of the mind and conscience were combined cooperatively and respectfully with the practical know-how and worldly experience of the national political, economic, and social leadership? Would we lose anything by widening our peace strategy? Considering this necessity, the founders of UPF, the late Reverend Dr. Moon and his wife, Dr. Hak Ja Han Moon, have made a series of concrete proposals in the year 2000 at an event at the UN in New York called Assembly 2000. Under the leadership of the president of ECOSOC at that time, the Indonesian ambassador, Dr. Makarim Wibisono, a proposal was made for the creation of an interreligious council at the United Nations organization, something like an upper house or senate to the current General Assembly that would gather religious actors who could be instrumental for bringing in that untapped potential for realizing a world of peace. In his speech of August 20, 2000, Dr. Moon stated, "It is possible to envision the United Nations as a bicameral institution. An interreligious assembly or council would consist of respected spiritual leaders in fields such as religion, culture, and education. Of course, the members of this interreligious assembly will need to have demonstrated an ability to transcend the limited interests of individual nations or constituencies and to speak to the concerns of the entire world and humanity at large." I think such an example is Reverend Pillay, and we are happy to have him here. I always thought that about you, so the first time I met you. Conclusion. To conclude my remarks, I would like to talk about some very practical wisdom of my everyday life. I may be not a scholar, but I'm a parent. And as a parent of 7 children, together with my wife, Carolyn, we have learned firsthand that the family is, as the school of love, is also a school of peace. There is a need for a constant effort of reconciliation and peacemaking. Parents are seeking peace and the well-being of all family members and go through a great deal of efforts every day trying to just do that. In this sense, religious actors understand better than anyone the importance of a parental position in situations of conflict. This is because religion sees God as a parent of our large human family. In the case of 2 siblings fighting, parents see the good in both, would not want any harm to happen to anyone. I mean, there are mothers also of the one and of the other, of the aggressor and of the victim, of the perpetrator and of the one who receives persecution or whatever. That's the reality. And if we have this parental position, we can understand that there's no interest in these 2 struggling and killing or hurting each other. Outstanding religious figures, like the founders of the great religions, but also more recent figures like Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., or Mother Teresa, challenge us to love even the unlovable, love even the enemy. It seems, come on, it's not possible. How can I love the enemy? That is the perspective of a parent. That's exactly the point. If I see my children fighting, I cannot say, okay, you kill them, kill the other. Huh? Even the one is right and the other one is wrong, but still, as a parent, what is my role? So therefore, the perspective of the parent is really important. Religious leaders and actors understand that reconciliation is possible by assuming a parental role, thus seeking the well-being and good of all, and of everyone at the same time, so that no one would be forgotten. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Henshin. I think all of us can relate and appreciated that insight on the importance of understanding a parental position in our approach to situations and conflict. I just have one quick question for you. As you've talked about this important principle that religious leaders need to broaden and embolden their voices in promoting peace, do you have some constructive suggestions for us on how religious institutions can pursue that objective in an increasingly secular environment?
Very good question. I mean, we have to see the root causes why the maybe more and more, or there's more and more a secular society currently, and we have to see maybe that this is not necessarily. Maybe life is too easy. Maybe it's making people think that they can do everything by themselves. But I think if I understood the question right, so what would you say? Can you repeat the first part?
Yes.
Sorry.
You were just, because you were talking about religious leaders needing to broaden and embolden their voices. How do we do that in an environment that is increasingly secular?
I think what people are mostly attracted to is when people get involved or when institutions get involved in issues that concern them. So I do think we have great institutions, faith-based institutions, that should consider to take up issues that are of value and that are of interest of the people living in the current world. We cannot have some kind of a position of religion somewhere beyond the physical reality. We should deal with issues that are burning now. So in context, we're dealing with wars or we're dealing with poverty. So why do we as religious actors not get involved more into issues that are really burning issues? Poverty eradication, and also issues that concern the environment, pollution, destruction of the environment in a rate that is alarming. That is what many young people are questioning. That's why they're demonstrating a little bit all over for peace or for, yeah. So I don't know if this is enough, but it points in the direction where I would recommend to go for religious institutions, and I'm sure maybe Dr. Pile has similar answers.
I think there was a time when people turned to the churches and religion for answers, and they came with the questions and they had expectations. Unfortunately, we live in a world now where many people are turned off and switched off from the religious voice. And as you said, there was a time when media came flocking to churches and church leaders, and now in most parts of the world they don't do it. Which is okay when you've got the space available to you. So your question is, what do you do now when the space is no longer available to you at that proportion? I have a very simple response to that. Claim the space. Claim the space. Don't wait for the invitation. Don't sit back and say, well, they are not giving us space. Claim the space, make the noise, show your relevance, show your presence, and let your voice be heard.
Thank you for that. Our final panelist, Ms. Shruti Lekha Raja Alango, is a doctoral researcher at the United Nations University for Peace, focusing on people-centered development cooperation. She also works as a development and program consultant for several organizations, including local governments, and she has been working with the Women's Federation for World Peace International, the UN Office Geneva, as a program consultant. She's founded and served as the director of a social enterprise called Polity Link International, and served as a lead on consulting for sustainable governance, partnering with several institutions. So we'll turn the time over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to reach out to the mic. It's a huge table. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm very humbled to be in the room with so many people from so many different diversities. And I would like to begin with something. I think I should just mention a little about myself beyond my professional accreditation as well, because I think it would help understand a little what I'm trying to share with you all today. I belong to a generation, as you might see, that is not in majority as religious as my previous generations were or are. And I also come from a place in South India called Tamil Nadu, where we had a historic movement called Dravidian movement to dismantle the misuse of religion for politics, abolishing the malpractices and to ensure an inclusive society. So in my state in India, if you come as a political party and talk in terms of religion, you are not going to win the election because we believe in more inclusive politics and not the misuse of religion in politics. So this is where I grew up and this is where I come from. But I'm also a person who respects the values of beliefs and religion because it's a crucial construct of our society. I belong to a Hindu family where I grew up learning our practices were nothing but a scientifically healthy lifestyle. You know, waking up early in the morning and even before the sun rises is a simulation for your mind, going to the temple, walking in barefoot, in stone-carved temples as acupuncture, you know, to simulate our nerves, and to also hearing all those great stories of the female gods of wealth, of education, of even power and strength. It's a female god as role models, and as a reminder that how special I am as a woman. How special I am to be born as a woman. So this is me, and this is where I come from, and this guided my perspective to this panel, actually. I really don't know if God exists because I belong to one of that generation where we're still questioning that, and I am not maybe that old enough to answer that question, but I do believe that religion is something which is more about living a healthy and compassionate lifestyle. I believe in religion as a crucial construct of the society, which often defines what we do, where we are, how we interact with each other, and basically how we live in this world. Coming from a country like India, a country full of religious diversity, and working in places like Europe, which struggles to establish religious inclusivity, I've always been interested in learning the values of unity in diversity. This is a motto that we most Indians carry, and this came along with me, unity in diversity. So I used to sit and listen to what people believe in their religions, what they practice, and reflect on what they actually do. And I often ended up having the same observations from all kinds of people I talked to. No matter what their socioeconomic status is or religion is they belong to, the observation of why we believe in certain things are almost the same, such as a feeling of sense of being part of a community, the essence of a support system, matter of hope, and ultimately a lifestyle which really correlates with the natural environment one lives in. Most of us are very similar to each other than we actually think. But on the other hand, I often get so disturbed by how blinded we are with the little things that makes us different than the bigger parts which are similar amongst us. So when I lecture students at the university, I lecture students of peace and conflict studies in a German university, and there I have students of all diversities from all different parts of the world. And when I lecture them, I often start with the subject of understanding peace and what it actually means to them or means to us. And most of them, and most of you here as well, have have been experts or debating or discussing the concepts of peace, and many explore the idea of positive peace versus negative peace, or different kinds of that peace. And the whole exploration of what we think of peace means to us leaves us already in different levels of understanding and needs. This difference in the standards of peace we have, especially through a very judgmental approach of one another, is the very beginning of our conflicts. I can explain what I mean by standards of peace as the beginning to our conflicts with a quick reference. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a first-generation immigrant and I'm from a very humble family in Germany. So I live in Germany, and I've lived there for years now, but still struggle with a difficult thing that Germans call the Ruhezeiten. So that's, for those of you who know, that's well. For those of you who don't know, it means which by law you're not allowed to make noise after 10 p.m. at night till 6 or 7 in the morning, such as even loud TV, washing machines, hair dryers, etc., anything that makes a little more noise that the neighbors can get annoyed. This is to not disturb the peace of those around you. As an Indian who's usually loud, just like I am now, I can get really depressed in quiet places. So I really have a tough time making sure I don't violate this law. I've been called for several warnings by my neighbors. I'm not the best neighbor in Germany. And I'm still struggling with that, despite living there for seven years now almost. And this is the case on all Sundays too. So as you see here, in Germany, there's a concept of peaceful night and a peaceful Sunday. So you can have a peaceful sleep, a peaceful walk, or a nice Sunday meal. And this is almost the legal standard of peace, that you can call the police on me and the police will come and knock the door warning me for this. So it is also because it's a very cultural and social matter as well, right? So it has become the norm of the existence of the German society. I think it's also the case here in Switzerland and a little, yes.
Swiss German particularly.
Swiss Germans particularly.
I am Swiss German.
But if you fly a few hours away from Germany, you have places which we often normalize to a certain standard of peace. Their conflicts, violence, and abuse of rights are all the different levels and standards of peace that we have set globally. We have not figured out how to hold these actors accountable for bombing children at the middle of the night in certain places of the world, while it's illegal to watch loud TV after 10 p.m. in places like Germany. I could get legal repercussions if I keep making noise after 10 p.m. and if my neighbor finds it annoying for the person's peace, but no repercussions for the millions of lives we've lost. For me, as an immigrant from outside of Germany, and also not from an active conflict zone, so I'm also very aware of the privilege I have that I'm not from an active conflict zone. It is a very interesting and sometimes even so upsetting to understand the double standards or even multi-layer standards of peace we have. I can't imagine how much of a hypocrisy my fellow friends from active conflict zones must tolerate to live in. Communities, both locally, this is not just what we've said globally, right? Even locally and globally, we have normalized conflicts, violence against women, mass atrocities such as genocide, humanitarian crimes, and whatnot. It's not okay to treat the peace of others differently than how we would treat ours. Just because the others are different, are of different color or of different practice religion, or they're different than you, could we treat them differently than we treat ourselves? Then why have we set such different standards, and why do we settle in those different standards of peace? Why can we not hold genocides, mass atrocities, humanitarian crimes accountable? So we need to set a global standards of peace that these are not okay. We need to hold them accountable. Only because of these different standards of peace, we allow conflicts to go on. I repeat it, we allow it. We must start questioning why is it okay to treat human life differently? Because just because where they live or what religion they believe in, we cannot treat them differently. If we want to imagine a world where we have no more wars, to answer this question, we must learn to stop normalizing the different standards of peace. We must act seriously and inclusively as we could. I would like to conclude by saying that there will be a day that there is a world with no more war, when we treat others just like how we would like to be treated and how we treat ourselves, when there is no double standards and no hypocrisy. We're all equal before nature and humanity, and when we as a species, master this evolution into equality, then there shall exist no more war. And this is what I truly believe. I thank this wonderful panel and the organizers for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be a part of these platforms to question ourselves on how can we do better as humanity. I'm very happy to be on this panel, while also hoping one day we would not have to have such panels and live in a world which is more peaceful, inclusive, and equal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alongo, for your message. Your passion just reminds us of the important role that the rising generation plays going forward in this peace process. A quick follow-up question for you. As you've talked about this global standard of peace, what are some actions that your generation can take now or even demand going forward that governments, civil societies, and even religious institutions take so that they are acting consistently upon these objectives?
Oh, thank you. I think that's a very, very important question, and I just would like to share briefly what I feel, and for example, what I experienced. I grew up, like I said, in a place where, I grew up in a school and in an environment where we did not even realize how inclusive we were, unless and until I came to Germany. Like, I grew up in India, I didn't even realize, because we celebrated all religious festivals, and I didn't even know the difference between my fellow friends from other religions. So that's how I grew up. But the generations before me, for example, my parents, they were very clear about the differences. So when I used to hear them talking about, making differential remarks and, discriminatory remarks, I couldn't tolerate it, and none of us understood it. Why are they talking? I always questioned. I had several arguments with my father on why is he talking like that, because I can't just imagine my friend to be addressed like that, right? So I was like, so that's how I think it started. So, and then I realized, moving to Germany, more becoming an adult and learning professionally how this works, I also realized that there's a multifaceted environment, and there's several directions. First, I think young people, students, they first need to stand up and they need to say, this is not okay. They should know that this is not okay. It's not okay to settle in a norm that is violating, that is not inclusive, because this is what causes conflicts, and which leads to an idea, the whole segregation, and then leads to wars. So I think young people must stand up and just say it's not okay. They should reflect, they should question. It's okay to question and ask. And at the same time, I feel like the education system and the environment that we build for children, they need to be more inclusive. So, for example, I really am so thankful for being part of a school system where I celebrated all the festivals, and I don't know, I think I studied with people of 7, 8 religions in one class. We were just 20 kids, but we had 7, 8 religions, if you can imagine. So I used to wait for every festival, because there were such good festivals, food and holidays. So we enjoyed it, we learned it, we just saw how similar we were. So I think it's both that we need to give students and young people more the inclusive space and inclusive environment, so they can learn what it is to live together peacefully, how it is, that it is no different, just like living with everybody else, and also to now the current generation to also claim their space, like our fellow panelists said, and make the statement that these are not okay. We can't just tolerate these inequalities and discrimination, which leads us to conflict. So I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you. We have just a few minutes, but I'm sure that there are many questions, and so we'll see if we can take a few questions in the time that we have remaining. Is there anyone that has a question for our panelists? Yes, right up here.
Bonjour à tous. Je vous remercie pour cette organisation. Donc je suis là avec l'association Cap Diversité que je remercie pour cette invitation. Je remercie les organisateurs. J'ai une petite question, peut-être une grande question à la plus jeune d'entre vous, hein, messieurs, dames, Madame Sruti. J'espère que je n'ai pas écorché votre nom. Je voulais savoir qu'est-ce qu'elle pense du mouvement des jeunes contre la guerre partout dans le monde, et notamment à Gaza.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think it was a heavy question. I got so many translations to get it right. So thank you so much. I think it's as I mentioned, I'm not from a very active conflict zone as well. So most of us, most of the young people who are in the conflict, active conflict, it's a total different approach to they are struggling for their basic rights to be fulfilled, to go get education, to live in a peaceful life. But for those outside of the conflict, like me, for example, I wake up every day and watch the news and look at, I go on Instagram and I have all the news updates every morning. I just wake up to the news and I'm confused. I'm confused every day on how can this happen and how can we live like this. So I think it's a movement that I'm very happy, and I'm very happy that I'm more conscious that I need to take something. So I do work in a way that I can advocate to more a peaceful environment in the ways that I can. For example, I work with Women's Federation, and we've organized conferences with young people from Israel and Palestine in 2021 to negotiate and mediate the conflict with young people who've never met each other from both the sides, and it was such a difficult job for me specifically because I had to prevent people from bursting out and crying, and because it's such a very intense conflict. And for us it is important that as young people from outside, and in this conference we also had young people from outside the conflict who were so motivated to be part of it because they all felt a sense of responsibility to do something. So I think every day we wake up young people, I would say, or even young professionals who work in this sector, to see how we can make a difference, And I think every little contribution that we do, a discussion we have in the classroom, a discussion with your friends, with your family, and holding someone accountable for making some remarks or using some language which is not inclusive, these are also ways forward in actually contributing to preventing such conflicts from exaggerating and to de-escalate the conflict. But it is indeed a nightmare for young people in our generation specifically to live in such a world where it keeps happening. It keeps happening, and honestly, there are no words. There are no words to actually even respond to the escalations every day.
Thank you.
There's somebody over there.
Yes, the gentleman in the front there, and then we'll take the gentleman, and then we'll take those three questions. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Imran, and I come from the Afghan Social Welfare and Humanitarian Aid Organization. Thank you very much for making this opportunity, and thank you for the panelists for their insights. I come from Afghanistan, a country that has been in the wars for over decades. So, and I think peace is essential, and we need more opportunities for the youth to participate and to engage and to see how can we end wars globally. Since the very early ages, I don't want to speak over too much. It's just a question. Since a very early age in my life, I have been asking a question of myself that who create wars? And why do people fight each other? So what's wrong with people? And later in life, I discovered that it's about the conflict of interests. It's basically that two persons, groups, communities, or religious groups, or countries, they find conflict of interest between each other and they fight. Sometimes it's about the arguments that two teams, two people or two communities would have between themselves. So my question here is, given the insights that all distinguished speakers provided, is that how significantly does the conflict of interests between various state and non-state entities contribute to the creation of wars and increasing conflicts around the world? Because it's about the conflict of interest at the end of the day. And how could we mitigate this conflict of interest and create a more cooperative world where globalization is no longer about dominance and creating wars to win over others, but is more about cooperation, collaboration, and working together? Thank you.
I think, the first thing we need to understand is that conflict is inevitable. It's there. It will always be there. And the question is, what do we do with conflict? And conflict is far beyond just a matter of interest. As I said earlier, researchers tell us it's about information, it's about values, et cetera, et cetera. There's a number of different factors that are actually responsible for conflict. But conflict needs to be managed well. You know, when they say, when you're having a fight, have a good fight, meaning that solve it, find ways to deal with it, to come up with solutions. The problem is that we don't want to find solutions together. We want to make one person's interest or one group's interest above the other. And that's where we need to learn. I think the idea of the characteristics that are involved, humility, patience, transparency, kindness, less judgment, all of those things are necessary in order to try to come to an environment and to an opportunity to be able to deal with conflict. So I think it's a multiple thing, but interests are always going to be there. People, it's a natural thing. Identity, interest are part of who we are. But it must never become an exclusive thing, meaning that it's only my interest. It must always be also of the interest of the other. And that's where I think we fall short. So we need to learn those values. And once we learn those values, we can be able to manage our conflicts a lot better. So I think the interest issues is important in this conflict, generally incited by that. But I think self-interest versus the interest of others is what we've got to learn, how to manage those different dimensions in the understanding of being able to work through conflict.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Hinton, did you have a comment on that too?
I'm going to say back to my simple family philosophy. Well, you have children when they are 3 years old, like what Reverend Pile said. It's unavoidable. They will take the same tool, say, no, that's mine, that's mine, that's mine. And there will be, what? Conflict. There is conflict. But I think we should understand that this is related to the fact, to much maturity that those stakeholders have. We should work on maturing people, and I think there is a great opportunity for religious actors to teach what real maturity is like. Maturity in heart, maturity, the wisdom that how to handle difference of opinion or self-interest for young children is very normal. They need that for survival, but for a 30-year-old only self-interest, that's not normal. There's something went wrong there. And we have to say education is important. Education and family is, as I said in my presentation, is a school of love, but also a school of peace, actually. So, yeah.
Thank you. Time for one or two more questions. Yes, sir, in the green jacket there.
Hafid Ouardiri de la Fondation pour l'Entreconnaissance. I can speak in English, but I prefer speak French because I'm French. So, Hafid Ouardiri de la Fondation pour l'Entreconnaissance, un des membres fondateurs de l'appel spirituel de Genève et un des membres fondateurs de la plateforme interreligieuse de Genève en 1992. Vous savez, nous sommes dans une période qui est absolument cruciale. On parle d'un thème qui fait des dégâts tous les jours et nous en sommes témoins. Je passe d'université en université ici à Genève et je suis souvent en discussion avec les jeunes étudiants. Et je peux vous dire qu'ils ont l'impression qu'ils ne sont ni écoutés par nous, ni écoutés par ceux qui font le désordre. Et que notre discours, nos paroles, nos mots n'ont presque plus de sens pour eux. Et je le dis parce que je suis sorti encore hier d'une discussion avec les jeunes sur ce qu'ils préparaient comme proposition au rectorat. À Lausanne, c'était pareil. À chaque fois, on leur fait des propositions, des promesses, et au dernier moment, lorsqu'ils viennent pour discuter et parler de leurs revendications, le rectorat leur tourne le dos. Ce que je voulais dire, c'est que lorsque je leur parle de ce que nous faisons pour essayer d'aboutir à la paix, ils nous écoutent sérieusement, mais en vérité, ils ont l'impression qu'on leur parle un langage qu'ils ne comprennent pas et que ce n'est pas le leur. Donc comment faut-il faire aujourd'hui pour que, non pas que l'on parle de ce que l'on voudrait faire, mais de ce qu'on devrait faire maintenant et immédiatement. Parce que nous avons sous les yeux aujourd'hui une situation qui est absolument déplorable. Je le dis parce que nous recevons aussi, entre autres, des enfants que nous rapatrions depuis Gaza pour les soigner ici. Et je peux vous dire les difficultés que nous avons à pouvoir les amener ici pour leur apporter des soins. Alors, quand est-ce que nous, citoyens du monde, nous allons être capables de mettre en place un système qui puisse favoriser la paix, alors que nous avons tous les jours des gens qui préparent la guerre? Merci.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for, I don't know if there needs to be a response on that, or we really, go ahead, Reverend.
I know we've had some discussion about young people, but I think we often don't value enough, as you've been saying, the contributions of young people, because we think they don't have much to teach us. They're new, they're young, they're learning, and that's not quite true. If I look back to my own country in South Africa, whilst religious leaders played a very significant role in averting a bloodshed and seeking peace and transformation and transition in the country, it was the young people who brought apartheid to its knees. They refused to accept apartheid, like the parents did and others did. They said, this is wrong. If you look at what is happening in the world today, and you make reference to Gaza, 130 campuses in America, young people are protesting. We won't go into the dynamics of that. But the point is, the young people are saying enough is enough. We don't accept what is happening. We don't accept the policies of our own country and government on these matters because they're placing their significance on human lives that have been wasted. So we have a lot to learn from them. I've learned a lot from my own children. They've taught me a lot of things. But I do think we need to sit down, we need to listen, we need to hear what they're saying, because they have a lot to teach us. And I think it's important. There's dynamics that are different. But I find that young people today, most young people, are very much more inclusive, learning to embrace diversity, becoming a lot more tolerant, create more spaces for other people, and are prepared to listen to the opinions of others. Many of other people are stuck with their own views, fixated to the nth degree about maintaining and sustaining their views, rather than actually having this flexibility of giving and receiving, sharing and learning and dialoguing. We need to learn this new experience from young people.
Thank you, Reverend. I think we have time just probably for one last quick question. Go ahead and take your question here.
Bonjour, messieurs, dames, bonjour. J'ai une question à poser concernant les BRICS qu'on entend parler en ce moment. Et la monnaie qu'ils pensent créer. Est-ce que l'ONU a... Est-ce que ça peut être un facteur d'évolution pour la paix? Voilà. Par rapport à toutes ces... quand on parlait tout à l'heure, le monsieur il parlait des pressions qui venaient un petit peu de partout. Est-ce qu'il peut y avoir un changement? Ça peut aider, et notamment avec les femmes, évidemment.
Thank you so much for that question. I mean, I'm doing my doctoral research on people-centered development cooperation, and often I always think about how we work together internationally, especially in platforms through like international organizations and so on. And what you see, what we find is very interesting is that there are several levels of conflict that we have, and when we're talking about conflicts within the state and conflicts between states, for example, what is happening in Gaza, there are several actors involved, but obviously there are several victims. There is a victim and there is a perpetrator, and in those cases, what happens is the political priorities and the political differences do play a big role in actually making a difference. I did a research on the responsibility to protect, and what I observed in that, and it's a very, very casual thing that anybody can observe, is, for example, the NATO took too much involvement in terms of their responsibility to engage in a conflict and protect the people's rights when the conflicts were in their neighboring countries, or when they were in their politically allied countries. But for developing countries, unlike the NATO, it's a difficult situation, because their political partnerships with every stakeholder, be it the one who is engaging in a conflict or not, be it the developed country or a developing country, is a very crucial part, because they're developing and they need political partnerships. So it's a very sensitive, and often the developing countries under the non-alignment movement, they usually don't really have the capacity or the power as much as the developed countries do to influence conflicts, as we were discussing. But they do have a huge capacity in mobilizing a global cooperation. As we speak, for example, we have bigger threats globally. We have climate change. We have other forms of threats which keep evolving, and we have so many evolutions for example, we don't know what's going to happen with the world where, for example, data protection, matters of climate change, gender-based violence, gender equality, and racism. There are several global concepts which are a bigger global problem, which could bring all these countries together. And BRICS obviously have a bigger role to play, but obviously they can come together. But thinking beyond the conflicts regionally and locally. Thank you.
Final comment here.
I think BRICS is much more than economics and politics. BRICS is about epistemologies. It is a different starting point and point of reference. It is a reaction to westernization and the bringing in of people who are saying there are different ways and premises from which we think and depart. And so to answer your question, absolutely. If BRICS is given the opportunity to be able to come up with new ideas, it will offer us better solutions. The problem is it has not been given and have not necessarily acquired the space to make an impact. It is looked upon with great suspicion, and it is always, always suppressed. But in spite of that environment, they are rising above. So I think in terms of development, in terms of influence, in terms of future premises of looking at different answers and finding solutions to given problems, there will be a greater possibility that BRICS can give us something new, if they're allowed to.
Thank you for those comments. I'm sorry we don't have more time. I feel like there's a lot of discussion that could continue, and I hope that it will continue, that this prompts a lot of just continuing dialogue. As we bring this discussion to a close, I would like to thank our panelists, Mr. Henshin, Ms. Alongo, and Reverend Pillay for their inspired and enlightening comments today. We recognize that this journey towards lasting peace is a long and an arduous one, but it's a journey worth taking together. And we've certainly heard today the importance of involving our rising generation in this effort. So we must bring the spirit of religion into our dialogues with each other. It can begin with something as simple as just getting to know each other, focusing on our similarities rather than our differences, and trying to see all people in the world as God's children, as brothers and sisters. Through our collective efforts, we can build a world where the darkness of war is replaced by enduring light of peace, creating a brighter and more harmonious future for generations to come. Thank you. We will now take a very short break. The next session, Part 2, will begin at 15:40. Right away, we've got some very important speakers in that session. So we will take a very quick break, and then please return back to this room for Part 2, No Peace Without Women, beginning promptly at 15:40. Thank you.
Thank you.